Sarah Williams never believed in fairy tales until that autumn day at Princeton University. The crisp September air carried promises of new beginnings as she hurried across the historic campus, her arms laden with business textbooks. As one of the few black students in the prestigious business program, she'd learned to carry herself with quiet dignity, letting her 4.0 GPA speak louder than any prejudice she encountered. The university library became her sanctuary, its towering shelves and hushed atmosphere providing comfort as she pursued her dreams. It was there, between the dusty economics volumes and financial journals, that destiny intervened. James Cooper stood out even among the ivy-covered walls and privileged students, tall with striking blue eyes and an easy confidence that seemed to part crowds. Their first interaction was almost cinematic. Sarah reached for a volume on corporate finance, her fingertips just inches short of the spine, when another hand grabbed it for her. James's smile that day would be forever etched in her memory. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that melted her usual reserve. What started as shared study sessions blossomed into something more profound. James struggled with advanced economics, and Sarah found herself explaining complex theories late into the night at the campus coffee shop. She saw past his privileged background to the vulnerability beneath, a boy trying to live up to his family's expectations while harboring dreams of his own. Their love story became the talk of campus. The brilliant black student and the charming white boy from old money. It was like a modern fairy tale. Sarah's friends warned her about the looks they received, about the whispers in corners, but she believed love could transcend society's prejudices. James held her hand proudly across campus, defended her against subtle racist comments, and shared dreams of their future together. Evenings were spent planning their post-graduation life. Sarah would light up talking about her ambitions to start a business empire that would help minority entrepreneurs. James would listen, seemingly entranced, adding his own dreams to their shared tapestry. They talked about marriage, about changing the world together, about proving that love could bridge any divide. Their relationship deepened over shared struggles and triumphs. When James barely passed his midterms, Sarah spent countless hours tutoring him, creating study guides, and encouraging him to believe in himself. When she faced discrimination from professors who questioned her abilities, James became her fierce defender. Or so she thought. The first crack's winter descended on Princeton with a bitter chill that seemed to mirror the subtle changes in James's behavior. At first, they were small things, so minor that Sarah questioned whether she was being paranoid. A cancelled study date here, an unanswered text there. The warm gleam in his blue eyes began to dim, replaced by something distant and calculating that Sarah couldn't quite name. Their usual spot in the library sat empty more often. "Sorry, babe," James would say, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Had to meet some friends from the golf club." The excuses piled up like the snow outside their classroom windows. Sarah noticed he'd started dressing differently too, trading his casual campus wear for designer suits and gold cufflinks that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. The Christmas break brought its own warning signs. While Sarah invited James to meet her family in Atlanta, he declined, citing a last-minute family ski trip to Aspen. The photos he posted on social media told a different story. Parties with the country club crowd, and in the background of several shots, a familiar face, Victoria Sterling, the daughter of one of New England's most prominent business families. January's return to campus felt different. The whispers in the hallways grew louder, but now they carried a different tone. "Did you hear about James and Victoria at the Sterling's New Year's gala?" Sarah overheard one afternoon. Her heart clenched, but she pushed the doubt away, throwing herself into helping James prepare for his upcoming exams. Their study sessions, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became tense affairs. James checked his phone constantly, his responses to Sarah's questions growing shorter and more irritated. "I don't need you to mother me," he snapped one evening when she suggested reviewing his financial projections again. The words hung in the air like icicles, sharp and cold. Sarah noticed other changes too. James began avoiding the cafeteria where they usually had lunch together. Instead, he could be seen at the exclusive campus cafe, sharing intimate conversations with Victoria Sterling and her wealthy friends. When Sarah would walk by, James would barely acknowledge her presence, his eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible. The Valentine's Day incident marked a turning point. Sarah had planned a surprise dinner, cooking James's favorite meals in the dormitory kitchen. She waited for 3 hours in her best dress, surrounded by cooling food and flickering candles. His text came at midnight. "Sorry, got caught up in a networking event. Rain check?" The next day, social media exploded with photos from the networking event, a lavish party at the Sterling estate. James stood center stage, his arm around Victoria's waist, both laughing at some private joke. Sarah's heart cracked a little more as she zoomed in on Victoria's hand, resting possessively on James's chest, a diamond tennis bracelet glinting on her wrist. Their friends began taking sides. Sarah's closest confidants tried to warn her. "He's changing," her roommate Maria whispered one night, "or maybe this is who he always was, and we just couldn't see it." But Sarah clung to the memories of their early days, believing that their love could weather any storm. March brought midterms and more excuses. James's grades continued to slip, but now he refused Sarah's help entirely. "Victoria's father knows the dean," he boasted during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "Grades aren't everything, Sarah. It's about who you know, not what you know." The final warning came during a chance encounter in the business building. Sarah rounded a corner to find James in deep conversation with Mr. Sterling himself, Victoria at his side. The older man's words drifted down the hallway. "Son, you've got potential. The right connections, the right background. We could use someone like you at Sterling Enterprises." Sarah stood frozen, watching as James straightened his expensive tie and shook Mr. Sterling's hand. His expression was one she'd never seen before. Hungry, calculating, determined. In that moment, she realized the boy who had reached for that textbook in the library months ago was disappearing, replaced by someone she barely recognized. The days grew longer, but their time together grew shorter. James began missing their standing dates, his excuses becoming more elaborate and less believable. Sarah found herself sitting alone in their favorite coffee shop, staring at the empty chair across from her, wondering when exactly their fairy tale had begun to unravel. And still she held on, even as her friends shared concerned glances, even as her grades began to suffer from the stress of it all. Sarah believed in the power of their love. She couldn't see that with each passing day, James was crafting a new narrative for himself, one that had no room for a brilliant but middle-class black girl from Atlanta, no matter how much she had helped him along the way. Little did she know, the true devastation was yet to come. The cracks in their relationship were about to shatter completely, leaving Sarah to face the cruel reality that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it's just a mask for ambition and prejudice that run far deeper than she could have imagined. 3. The cruel betrayal. The day that would shatter Sarah's world dawned deceptively beautiful. Spring had painted the Princeton campus in pastels, cherry blossoms drifting like pink snow across the manicured lawns. Sarah had spent the morning preparing for her international business presentation, her navy blazer pressed perfectly, her notes meticulously organized. She hadn't seen James in 3 days, her texts met with increasingly brief responses. But today was important. She was presenting her thesis proposal to the department heads, and despite everything, she believed James would be there to support her. He had promised, after all, back when promises between them still meant something. The presentation went brilliantly. Professor Martinez even called it revolutionary. Her proposal for sustainable business practices in underserved communities striking a chord with the faculty. But the empty seat in the back of the room, where James should have been, felt like an open wound. Gathering her courage, Sarah decided to find him. She had heard whispers about a gathering near the Princeton Fountain, the historic heart of campus where couples had been getting engaged for generations. Her heels clicked against the cobblestones as she approached, the sound of laughter and conversation growing louder. The scene that greeted her would be forever burned into her memory. James stood by the fountain, but he wasn't alone. Victoria Sterling was pressed against his side, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun, a massive diamond ring glittering on her left hand. They were surrounded by a crowd of their wealthy peers, champagne flutes tinkling as toasts were made. Sarah's heart stopped when James's eyes met hers. There was no warmth there anymore, no trace of the boy who had reached for that textbook months ago. Instead, his lips curled into a smirk that transformed his handsome face into something cruel and unfamiliar. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "Look who it is. Come to congratulate us, Sarah." His arm tightened around Victoria's waist as he addressed their audience. "You all remember Sarah, right? My former study buddy." The crowd tittered with malicious laughter. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a predatory smile. "Oh, James told me all about you," she purred. "How helpful you were with his coursework. Consider this your letter of recommendation." He passed with flying colors. Sarah stood frozen, her presentation folder clutched to her chest like a shield. "James," she managed to whisper, "what are you doing?" He laughed then, a sound so cold it frosted the spring air. "Come on, Sarah, you're supposed to be the smart one. Did you really think this was real?" He gestured between them. "You were convenient, a free tutor who came with additional benefits, but let's be realistic. Someone like me ends up with someone like Victoria. That's just how the world works." "Someone like you?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What exactly does that mean, James?" "Oh, don't play naive," Victoria interjected, her diamond ring flashing as she waved her hand dismissively. "James needs a certain image for his future. Daddy's already made him junior VP at Sterling Enterprises. We can't have any complications." The word complications hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt her knees weaken as realization crashed over her. Every late-night study session, every shared dream, every kiss and promise, they had all been calculated steps in James's social climbing strategy. "You used me," she said, her voice gaining strength despite the tears threatening to fall. "All this time, I was just a stepping stone." James's response was brutal in its casualness. "Consider it a business transaction. You helped me pass my classes. I gave you a taste of upper society. But the transaction's complete now." He raised his champagne flute. "No hard feelings, right?" The laughter that followed was like broken glass in Sarah's ears. She watched as James turned away, pulling Victoria into a theatrical kiss that drew cheers from their audience. Her presentation folder slipped from her numb fingers, papers scattering across the courtyard like fallen leaves. As she turned to flee, she heard Victoria's voice floating after her. "Oh, and Sarah? Thanks for helping James with his business ethics paper. The irony is just delicious, don't you think?" Sarah ran until her legs gave out, finding herself in a secluded corner of the campus gardens. There, surrounded by blooming flowers that suddenly seemed to mock her with their beauty, she finally let the tears fall. Her body shook with sobs as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over her. Her phone buzzed. A campus-wide email announcing James and Victoria's engagement, complete with professional photos from the fountain. The caption read, "Two of Princeton's finest, united in love and ambition." That night, alone in her dorm room, Sarah faced the cruel reality that everything she had believed in was a lie. The love she had given so freely had been weaponized against her. Her academic success, once a source of pride, felt hollow knowing it had been used to further James's deception. As darkness fell over Princeton, Sarah Williams, who had never taken less than an A in any class, who had tutored countless students, who had believed in the power of love to bridge any divide, curled into herself and began to break. She didn't know it yet, but this betrayal would mark the beginning of her descent into a darkness deeper than anything she had ever known. Would you like me to continue with the next section? Descent into Darkness, where we follow Sarah's struggle with depression and the toll this betrayal takes on her life. 4. Descent into Darkness. The campus cherry blossoms had withered and died by the time Sarah's world completely unraveled. What started as missed morning classes evolved into days spent in bed, curtains drawn against the cruel spring sunshine. Her once immaculate dorm room transformed into a cave of despair, littered with unwashed clothes and unopened textbooks. The first F grade of her life arrived via email, Advanced Financial Markets, ironically the class where she had first tutored James. Professor Martinez's concerned notes went unread. "Sarah, this isn't like you. Please come see me." Her phone buzzed constantly with worried messages from friends until she finally turned it off, unable to bear their pity. Her roommate Maria tried everything, bringing food, offering to take notes, even threatening to call campus health services. "Sarah, you haven't eaten in 2 days," she would plead, setting plates of food that went untouched. The smell of coffee, once her favorite morning comfort, now made her nauseous, reminding her of late-night study sessions with James. Sleep became both escape and torment. In her dreams, she relived the fountain scene repeatedly, each version more cruel than the last. She would wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, James's mocking laughter echoing in her ears. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, deepening with each passing day until she barely recognized her reflection. The campus that had once felt like home became a battlefield of memories. The library where they first met might as well have been a haunted house. The coffee shop where they had planned their future now seemed to mock her with every cheerful ring of its bell. Even the business building, once her sanctuary of ambition, became unbearable. Her weight dropped dramatically. The tailored blazers she had worn with such pride now hung like empty shadows on her frame. Her natural hair, usually maintained with meticulous care, became matted and unkempt. The few times she dragged herself to the bathroom, she avoided the mirror entirely. The breaking point came during a rare venture to class, prompted by a final warning email about her academic standing. She made it halfway across campus before spotting James and Victoria leaving the dean's office, their engagement announcement plastered across the university newspaper they carried. The sight of their matching smiles sent her world spinning. She collapsed right there in the polished hallway of the business building. Her body, weakened by weeks of self-neglect, simply gave out. The last thing she heard before consciousness faded was someone shouting for help, and through blurred vision, she saw a crowd gathering. In that moment, she welcomed the darkness. The hospital admission forms listed severe dehydration, malnutrition, and acute stress disorder. The attending physician spoke in hushed tones about suicide watch protocols. Though Sarah had never actively considered ending her life, it was more that she had forgotten how to live. Han Nummer Fem. Divine Intervention. The hospital room on the 7th floor became Sarah's world for the next 3 weeks. The walls were an institutional pale green, probably meant to be soothing, but serving only to emphasize the sterility of her existence. IVs dripped nutrients into her depleted body, while monitors beeped a steady rhythm that marked time in this suspended reality. Dorothy Williams arrived like a force of nature, her carry-on bag still in hand as she burst into the hospital room. One look at her daughter, her brilliant, beautiful girl now reduced to a shadow, and the strong woman who had raised Sarah alone after her father's death felt her knees buckle. "Oh, baby girl," Dorothy whispered, gathering Sarah's frail hand in hers. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Sarah couldn't find words to explain how shame had silenced her, how admitting what happened meant facing the reality of her naivete. The doctors spoke in clinical terms about depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. They prescribed medications with long names and longer lists of side effects. Dorothy listened, took notes, asked questions, but her real focus was on the vacant look in her daughter's eyes. Nights were the worst. When darkness fell over Princeton Medical Center, the quiet became oppressive. Sarah would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, while her mother slept uncomfortably in the visitor's chair, refusing to leave her side. The beeping monitors became a metronome for her dark thoughts. It was on one such night, during the darkest hour before dawn, that everything changed. Sarah had finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams usually tormented by memories of James's betrayal, but this dream was different. She found herself in a garden unlike anything she'd ever seen. The air itself seemed to shimmer with golden light. Flowers of impossible colors bloomed everywhere, blues deeper than oceans, purples richer than royalty, whites purer than fresh snow. The grass beneath her feet felt like silk, and the air carried the sweet scent of jasmine and something indefinable, something divine. A presence enveloped her, warm and powerful yet gentle. It reminded her of summer sunshine and her mother's embrace, of triumph and peace all at once. Then came the voice, neither male nor female, both ancient and timeless, speaking directly to her soul. "My child," it said, the words seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, "you have lost your way in the valley of shadows. But this valley is not your home. Look up." Sarah lifted her eyes to see constellations she'd never seen before, forming patterns that spoke of destiny and purpose. The voice continued, each word filling her with warmth. "Your pain is not your ending. It is your beginning. In breaking, you will find your strength. In falling, you will learn to fly. Your purpose is greater than your pain, your destiny larger than your defeat." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but unlike the tears she'd shed for weeks, these felt cleansing. The presence drew closer, and she felt love, pure, unconditional love, washing over her like waves. "Rise up, daughter of light. You were not created for shame but for glory. Your mind is a gift, your heart is a force, and your spirit is unbreakable. What was meant to destroy you will become your testimony." The garden began to transform. Sarah watched as broken things became beautiful, shattered glass becoming diamonds, withered flowers bursting into new blooms. She understood the metaphor. This was her journey, her transformation. "But what about the pain?" she asked, her voice small in the vast garden. "Pain properly processed becomes power," the voice answered. "Your tears will water the seeds of your destiny. Watch." Before her eyes, she saw visions of herself in the future. Strong, successful, helping others rise from their own ashes. She saw herself building something magnificent, not just for herself, but for countless others who needed hope. Sarah woke with a gasp, tears streaming down her face. The hospital room was still dark, but something had changed. The monitors still beeped, the IV still dripped, but the air felt different. Her mother stirred in the chair beside her. "Sarah? Baby, are you okay?" "Mom?" Sarah whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. I saw hope." Dorothy leaned forward, taking her daughter's hand, feeling something different in her grip, a new strength, a spark of the old Sarah returning. "Tell me everything." As Sarah recounted her vision, the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital window. It caught the tears on her cheeks, making them shine like diamonds. Dorothy listened, her own eyes filling with tears of joy as she watched life returning to her daughter's face. That morning, when the doctors made their rounds, they found a different patient. Sarah asked for a notebook, then another, filling pages with plans and ideas. She requested her laptop, began catching up on missed assignments. The spark in her eyes was back, but it was different now, tempered by fire, strengthened by adversity. The nurses whispered about miraculous recoveries, but Sarah knew better. This wasn't just recovery. It was resurrection. The garden of her vision became her mental sanctuary. When darkness threatened to return, she would close her eyes and remember the voice, the light, the promise of purpose beyond pain. 7. An unexpected reunion. Rain drummed against the windows of Blackrise Tower on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. Sarah sat in her private observation room, separated from the HR department by one-way glass. It had become her habit to occasionally observe interviews, not out of distrust for her HR team, but to stay connected to the human element of her company. Today's candidates included recent graduates, industry veterans, and Sarah's heart stopped. The man who walked through the door was both familiar and foreign. James Cooper, once the embodiment of privileged confidence, now wore a shabby suit that hung loose on his frame. His golden boy looks had faded, replaced by premature grey at his temples and lines of worry around his eyes. "Mr. Cooper," the HR manager began, consulting his file, "your application is interesting. You were previously VP at Sterling Enterprises?" James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Yes, until the collapse. I've been having trouble finding work since then. The Sterling name isn't exactly a recommendation anymore." Sarah leaned forward, studying the man who had once shattered her world. The scandal had been spectacular. Sterling Enterprises exposed for systematic discrimination in lending practices, predatory investments in minority communities, and finally, corporate fraud that made national headlines. Victoria's father was serving time in federal prison. "I'll take any position," James was saying, his voice cracking. "I have a child to support. Victoria, she left 2 years ago, married a European banker. I just need a chance to work honest work." Through the glass, Sarah watched him break down, years of arrogance stripped away by hardship. The HR manager looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the name from company blacklists. But something in James's desperation felt genuine. Sarah pressed the intercom button. "Hire him," she said simply. "Maintenance department. Entry level." For 3 months, she watched through security cameras as James cleaned floors, emptied trash, and did the honest work he'd once considered beneath him. He never complained, worked overtime without being asked, and treated every task with a humility that seemed genuine. Then came the day of the corporate-wide meeting. Sarah stood at the podium announcing Blackrise's expansion into 5 new cities. As she scanned the assembled employees, she caught James's eye. The recognition was immediate, his face draining of color as reality crashed over him. 8. Justice and mercy. The next morning, Sarah had her assistant summon James to her office. He entered like a man walking to execution, still wearing his maintenance uniform, eyes fixed on the plush carpet. "Hello, James," Sarah said quietly, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows. "It's been a while." "Sarah," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. I didn't know. I should resign immediately." "Sit down," she commanded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to talk." Rain continued to fall outside as Sarah studied the man before her. Time and hardship had changed him physically, but the real transformation was in his eyes, the entitled arrogance replaced by something that looked remarkably like wisdom. "Do you know what Black Rise does, James?" she asked, her voice steady. "We help people rise from their circumstances. We believe in second chances, but we also believe in justice." Tears fell freely down James's face now. "What I did to you. There's no justice that could make that right. I was cruel, racist, selfish. I used you and threw you away like you meant nothing. But you meant everything. I just couldn't see it through my own prejudice and ambition." Sarah walked to a shelf and pulled out a familiar folder, her hospital records from years ago. "You nearly destroyed me," she said calmly. "I almost lost everything. My health, my degree, my future. But something remarkable happened in that darkness. I found my purpose." She turned back to him. "I'm not going to fire you, James. That would be too easy. Instead, you're going to keep working here, doing honest work. You're going to watch as I help build up all the people you once looked down on. That's your redemption story." "Why?" he asked, voice breaking. "Why show me any mercy?" "This isn't mercy, James. This is justice. The kind that teaches rather than destroys. The kind that transforms rather than punishes. You're going to learn what real success looks like. Not the artificial kind built on prejudice and privilege, but the genuine success that comes from lifting others as you climb." She handed him a new employee packet. "Starting next week, you'll split your time between maintenance and our community outreach program. You'll work with the people you once helped Sterling exploit. You'll learn their stories, understand their struggles, and be part of their success." James clutched the packet like a lifeline. "I don't deserve this chance." "No, you don't," Sarah agreed. "But that's the thing about grace. It's not about deserving. It's about becoming. Now get back to work. Those floors won't clean themselves." As she watched him leave, Sarah felt the last chains of her past falling away. She thought about the garden from her vision years ago, how broken things had become beautiful. James's presence in her company wasn't about romance or revenge. It was about redemption, about turning pain into purpose. The rain outside finally stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds. Sarah stood at her window, watching the city below. Her empire wasn't built on hatred or revenge, but on hope and transformation. She had transformed her greatest pain into her greatest purpose. On her desk sat a framed quote that had guided her journey. "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Below it, she'd added her own words. "And sometimes the greatest victory is helping others rise." The afternoon sun caught the Black Rise logo, the phoenix rising from flames, sending rainbow reflections across her office. Sarah Williams smiled, finally and completely free. She had built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, not just a business empire, but a legacy of transformation. And somewhere, in a garden of impossible beauty, she knew that divine presence was smiling too. If you enjoyed our story, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.